All right. Well, hi, Kathleen. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you,
I'm
Priscilla?
great. I'm great. I'm really excited to talk about this. So I want to introduce you to everybody before we get started. So you are my special guest today, Mrs. Kathleen Chandler. What's really cool is you are my first guest who is a fourth generation Colorado native. Your grandpa actually owned the first grocery store in what city?
Canyon City, a
Canyon
little, yeah,
City.
southwestern Colorado.
Awesome. And you graduated at UCCS, which is University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and your degree is in political science.
Yep.
But your most important job is wife to Mr. Roger. And he
Yes.
is actually, if you've met him, he is like a Mr. Rogers. And you are a mom and you have a blended family and you've just spent your whole life here in Colorado, and you know Colorado inside and out and have so much love for Colorado. And the reason why I am having you on today is because I actually had the chance to hear you speak for the first time last night on the ballot measures, and just the way you went through each one and just explained in depth what they meant was such a powerful thing that I had to have you on today to share with people who haven't voted yet, or maybe even people who have voted who a lot of times are like, I don't know what to vote on. The blue book really doesn't help me understand. I don't, there's so many nuances of information we don't get as voters. And so what we're going to do is encourage people to listen to what you have to say today, continue to do your own research. There's so much information out there, ask questions, and then vote your values, because we want people to think and own their own vote, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things I always tell people is think about freedom. We don't think enough anymore. We get into our little blocks, or we maybe don't think very deeply about things that really do affect us, and that's policy and politics. We might be thinking about 1,000 other things, and we only might come up for air every couple of years when the ballot initiatives, or when there's a presidential race or a governor race or whatever. But I want you to think about how this affects your everyday life all the time, because once we think about it, we can then empower ourselves to make a difference.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. We're going to start with Amendment B, which the subject line is taxes and property. And the description says repeals the Gallagher Amendment of 1982, which limited the residential and non-residential property tax assessment rates so that residential property taxes amounted to 45% of the total share of state property taxes, and non-residential property taxes amounted to 55% of the total share of state property taxes. Okay, can you demystify that and please explain what
Sure.
we're voting on here?
Sure. Well, in 1982, we passed an amendment here in Colorado called the Gallagher Amendment. And what it did was it set in motion a ratio between your private property and business property taxes. Now, when you pay your taxes on your private property or business tax, there's three things that make that up: your assessment rate, the actual value of the property, and the mill levy. Now, those are all weird things. So the residential assessment rate is capped, according to the Gallagher Amendment, for residents at 7.91%, and for businesses at 29%. So if your house is evaluated at $100,000, you only pay tax on that on the 7.91% of the assessed rate. You don't pay it on the $100,000. And they put these ratios to help with the cost of the rising of the house assessment and the businesses. And at the time, it made a lot of sense because businesses could pay a lion's share of that tax. The other two I mentioned for your assessment rate are your evaluation is the one, your mill levy, and then just that ratio that's in there in the private property versus your residential property. The Gallagher Amendment was a very good thing. And I am actually advocating for no not because the Gallagher Amendment doesn't need to be fixed, but because it doesn't need to be repealed. I believe what's happened is our state legislators have become lazy in their thinking, and they aren't doing the hard work. This is a problem in this ratio of 45% for residents and 55% for business when you are in a community where there aren't very many businesses, right? So let's say you're out on the Eastern Plains and you might have a grocery store, a gas station, a butcher shop, those kinds of things. And all of a sudden they're having the lion's share of businesses that they're having to pay, right? And so that is a burden for them. But you come up here, up and down the Front Range, and that's not such a burden because we have lots of different businesses and property values are rising and rising and rising. So we do need to keep them lower for residents. Otherwise, you're going to price older people really truly out of their home because they won't be able to pay the taxes that are due on their home. So my thought is don't repeal this because they've come up with no solution for it once it's been repealed, but come up with a regional approach. And our legislators they were lazy, I have to say that, because they didn't come up with a good solution. They just came up with this idea of repeal. And so I'm asking you to vote no, not because I don't think it's not fair, which it isn't, but because I want you to make them, your state legislators, accountable. The whole idea is we've elected them to do a hard job, right? That's why they got into this. They haven't done the hard work and the hard thinking that needs to happen for this kind of a solution to be implemented. And instead, they've given us a blanket approach. And as a voter, we don't know a whole lot, right? We aren't as experienced. We don't know all the ins and outs. And so for a repeal, it could mean a very big tax increase for residential property. And I think that most of us would say no, especially in the middle of a pandemic. And so I understand this, I get it, but this is not the solution. I would hope that people would recognize that and vote no, because it would force our state legislators to go back to the drawing board and hopefully come up with a solution that is better for all of Colorado, not just the Front Range where the population is and where all of the residents are. You know, we need to think of rural communities. As I said, I'm a native. I love my rural communities. I grew up mostly in Black Forest, which is a little community just between here and Colorado Springs. And to not have that ability to fix this problem for them is a travesty. But I also live now in suburbia Aurora, and I don't want my property taxes out of control. So it's not up to us as citizens to come up with that solution. It's really up to them as our state legislators, because that's why we elected them. Otherwise, we'd have direct democracy.
Well, I mean, that's two great points that you make. And we do need to remember that life here in the metro area is very different from the life people live outside in the rural areas. Thanks for that analysis. Let's move on to Amendment C, which the subject is the lottery. And the description is requires charitable organizations to have existed for 3 years before obtaining a charitable gaming license instead of 5 years, allows charitable organizations to hire managers and operators of gaming activities so long as they are not paid more than the minimum wage. And I looked in the Blue Book, and this has to do with bingo. And I'm like, okay, that we're voting on bingo. Okay.
Yeah. The state legislators have decided that they need to regulate bingo and raffle licenses. So you cannot actually do a bingo game for your charity or a raffle unless you have a license. Now, we can argue. I think that's the silliest thing in the world. I don't know why government is involved in that and why you have to have a license to be a bingo operator, but you do. And so this amendment would change those regulations that oversee the bingo people. So again, it's kind of a silly thing to think about for us as voters, but my analysis is anything with a letter that has an amendment, one of the amendments has a letter like C or B or EE, we'll go through those. Generally, it means that government's wanting to do something to you. because it's a referred measure from government. So I would say this is a no vote for me, only because why is government all of a sudden deciding that you could pay people, you can't pay people, how much you're going to pay people? They're really getting into the minutia of regulating government or regulating private businesses and charities. And I just think that's not really what they should be doing. My dad worked for the Elks Club for years, and they have bingo night. And I can remember going to bingo night and thinking this was really great. But to have to pay your workers now to run your bingo really reduces the amount of money you're going to make as a charity. This used to be housed by people that were volunteers. They wanted to help the Elks Club or another charity raise money, and they were volunteering their time. So is this really the proper role of government? I'm not so sure. So I'm a no vote, although there's both people on both sides. Again, I think it's one of those issues where the average person's really not going to care too much about bingo and raffles, but it just shows you what the scope of government will be in your life. So we need to think about how government affects us.
Thank you. Okay, Amendment 76, suffrage. And the description says, amends the Colorado Constitution to state that only a citizen of the U.S. who is 18 years or older can vote in federal, state, and local elections, instead of the existing language that says every citizen who is 18 years old can vote.
The reason they're tightening up this language is because there's two components. One is citizenship and one is age. And citizenship can be qualified as anything, right? Because you can be a natural born citizen, you can get a green card citizenship, there's all kinds of other qualifications. So it's tightening up that language on citizenship, and it's also tightening up the age. And the age component is something that kind of got me a little bit more excited. In California, in many school districts, specifically San Francisco area, they are now allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in those municipal elections because they're not a federal election, right? Those are regulations that are housed by their state government. So if you really want a 16 or a 17-year-old voting on your school board election, I don't really think so, mostly because they aren't really mature enough and they aren't paying taxes yet, and they're really sitting in under the tutelage of their teachers. So if their teachers are for it and they preach and teach on it all day long, what do you think the student's going to do? So all of a sudden you're entering in this younger group that maybe is not in the right place to be able to vote on something. This doesn't affect national elections because we have that already for national. But if you don't take that language here in Colorado, we could have that same thing happen here, where a very liberal municipal election could start to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, along with potentially non-citizens, right? So this is tightening up that language for both of those so that we all know what the playing field is. There's no discussion, no ability to kind of work through what that language might mean.
Okay, thank you. The next one is amendment.
Oh, so that's a vote yes on that one, by the way. At least from me.
Okay. So Amendment 77 is gambling, and the description says allows voters in Central City, Blackhawk, and Cripple Creek to vote to expand allowed gaming types and bet limits.
So many years ago, Blackhawk, Central City, and Cripple Creek all voted to, we as a state voted to allow those communities to have gambling. And we've set the limit at $100. We have amended that. It used to be even lower, then we raised it. Now, with the advent of sports betting with no limit, Blackhawk, Central City, and Cripple Creek are feeling left out. They're like, well, how can we have this and not that? My feeling is vote no on this for multiple reasons. One is, do we really want these communities to have higher and higher limits? Voting yes on this would allow them to have local control over the limits. So if this passes, those that live in Black Hawk, Central City, and Cripple Creek would then locally vote on what their limits would be or no limits at all. That's good. I always have to remind people that local control sounds good, but it's still control, right? So here's the idea. If you have Black Hawk votes and they have no limits, don't you think there's going to be a huge amount of crime and a huge wave of these becoming little Las Vegases all over? And as a lifelong Coloradan, I don't want my state to turn into that. Right now, you can't turn on the TV or the radio or anything without having 500 sports gambling ads. You know, same thing with marijuana. It's infiltrated the entire state. So you can't tell me that we wouldn't be getting massive amounts of ads for these different locations. And I also think that the people that work there might be pressured by their employer to vote a certain way because it would mean millions and millions and millions of dollars for them. And the money that they say that they're going to raise, this additional tax that they're going to have, is supposedly going for community colleges. Well, here's the deal. Do we always have to have a good and a bad? If we want to raise money for community college, then ask me for that. Don't ask me to tax something over here to fund something else, especially when I don't gamble. And so in reality, it really doesn't affect me, but I think it will affect the culture of Colorado. And that's why I'm a vote no on this as well.
Okay, thank you. Proposition EE, tobacco and taxes. And the description is increases taxes on tobacco, creates a new tax on nicotine products such as e-cigarettes, dedicates funds to education and health programs.
Okay, again, we have a wonderful tax that is on some people to pay for a lot of people. And I just think it's immoral. You know, to think about that, I would like all-day kindergarten, but I'm going to make those that smoke pay for it. I just think that's really wrong. And then secondly, anytime you tax something, you get less of it. So let's say we continue to tax cigarettes, we're going to get less people smoking. Just it's proven. Well, eventually the tax is going to decrease, the tax revenue is going to decrease. And therefore, are we going to have that funding for all-day kindergarten? Pretty soon, we're going to have to figure out how to fund that some other way. So why not just ask me outright how to fund this better? Plus, this tax, if you think about it, is really regressive. And I don't like regressive taxes because it hurts poor people. You know, I am a middle-class person living in suburbia, but I don't want to see poor people taxed any more than they need to be or any more than they should be, right? So think about a tax that's a guy's earning $50,000 and he buys a pack of cigarettes a day, and a guy who's earning $100,000 and he pays buys a one pack a day as well. Well, just because this guy's only earning $50,000 and this guy's earning $100,000 doesn't mean their tax is the same. In fact, it's wrong because it's a larger percentage of the lower income's wage that he's earning. It's not as a bigger burden on the $100,000 guy. And so it's really an unfair tax. This guy is not going to consume more cigarettes just because he earns more money. You can't consume something more. A good analogy, I had a friend from work, he's like, yeah, I just had a baby. He says, I went and bought a stroller. He bought one stroller. And the guy that makes $1 million has a baby. He buys one stroller. Just because he earns $1 million doesn't mean he's going to buy 5 strollers or 10 strollers. So it's a consumption tax. It's really unfair to those that are at lower income. And that's where I think morally it's wrong. It's not only wrong to tax people that earn less more, but it's also immoral to tax people who are wanting to fund something that's good, like all-day kindergarten, on the backs of those that can least afford it.
Thank you. That's a great analogy. Let's see. We are on Proposition 113, elections. The description is joins Colorado into the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, awarding Colorado's electoral votes to the winner of the National Popular Vote. And before you go into description, I am going to insert my own personal bias because this is my life. This is a no, 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 no. Okay, but I'm going to let you explain why.
Well, it's a no on multiple levels. If we were to be part of it, well, first of all, those under the Golden Dome, right, in our state legislators, they passed this through the state house, they passed it through the state senate, and our governor signed it. The only reason we are allowed to vote on this is because we had some very wonderful citizens that rose up and said, wait a minute, we don't want to be part of this in Colorado, and we're going to override you. And so they rose up, gathered signatures, and said, we don't want to be part of this. Let's vote, right? Because our state legislators, we as citizens can override them through the initiative process. So this is an initiative run by citizens to say, no, we don't want to be part of your compact, the National Popular Vote Compact. So what does the National Popular Vote do for us as Coloradans? Well, right now, you need 270 electoral votes in order to become president of the United States. Colorado has 9 of those. So if you think about it, 270 and 9, it's an okay percentage, right, of 270, 9 is. The advantage of that is if Colorado had no electoral votes, which pretty much would happen, then why would anybody come to Colorado to campaign? So this really is about, do the votes in Colorado go to the people that we want to elect in Colorado? If we were to join this compact, you can just imagine California has 55 electoral votes, but a national vote would allow Orange County, California, which is small, right, has the same population as the entire state of Colorado. And so now the election would be based on population. So why would you ever campaign in a very large state like Colorado, which has very few people, and you wouldn't campaign just in Orange County, California, to get the same vote totals? So it really does not allow Colorado to be Colorado. It doesn't allow us to have a voice on the national scene, and it would make us worse flyover country than we already are. So this is a huge, big no vote. Plus, I want us to rise up and say no, that our state legislators, including our governor, didn't even ask, didn't even want to know what we wanted. They passed this with no input from us as citizens. And so this is an opportunity for us to rise up as citizens and to say no to the national popular vote. I mean, there's just so many things wrong with this. It would end up really just allowing the coasts, where the most population is, to rule who becomes president of the United States. Our founding fathers were really smart. They set up the national popular vote based on population, but then they gave each one of us a vote within that population limit. And so we as Coloradans still have 9 votes. And if we win on the population that they're talking about revamping this all, we would have basically no vote because California or New York could vote us out. And it really
yeah, I hear this argument like that was so long ago when the founding fathers, but you know what? They had this exact debate and they came to the conclusion that this would be the most fair way. We are not a democracy. We are a republic, and people don't understand that if we want to have more fairness and more equity in our representation, that we really do need to keep the system that we have right now and not give up our voice. I think it's because Colorado is not New York. We are not California. There's so many beautiful things about our state. And I think liberty is something that we need to protect, and we need to protect our electoral college, and we need to protect our voices. And so, yeah, I mean, I told myself I wasn't going to be overly opinionated, but on this one, I feel like we just have so much at stake in the future. Yeah. So I'm gonna keep going. How's that? I think
Well,
we've
and
made
I
our
just
point.
wanted to say too that as if Colorado, we are a bellwether state. Whatever happens in Colorado happens in a lot of other states. We're kind of the petri dish of democracy and ideas and stuff. That's one of our things that makes Colorado great, is that we're all thinking and liberty oriented, but we're also very progressive in other areas. I mean, so we're kind of all over the map. Well, if Colorado was to vote for this, I believe that it would become part of the national landscape rather quickly, because states like Kansas, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, all of those, New Mexico, around us would start to see, well, maybe this isn't such a bad idea. And the next thing you know, it's going to explode around the nation, and then we all are going to lose our votes, because we have to be part of a compact which requires other states to join. And already California, New York, Illinois, the larger population states have joined this compact, and they want to start picking off the smaller ones. And because we know we have the most at stake, and because we are small, and if they start to pick us off one by one, then it's all going to be lost.
Well, we're in danger of becoming obsolete if this passes. And I think people need to understand that. I'm just going to be pointed. We know there are a lot of people who don't like who is in the presidency. And so this movement is a reaction to that rather than being fair. I mean, I don't think that this is a wise decision to go this route. And so for the sake of time,
the pendulum swings both ways.
it does.
1 minute you're here, 1 minute you're here. So, when your guy's in power, it's all great. But when your guy's not in power, it's all bad. That's the beauty of where we live and how we govern, is that, elections, they have consequences. And so we deal with it.
Yeah, we can fix our problems in other ways. And I firmly believe it starts with you and I and one-on-one, just treating each other a lot better than what we're doing lately. Okay, moving on. Let's see. We are on Proposition 114, Forests and Parks and Environment. And the description is reintroduces gray wolves on public lands. And everybody's like, what? What is this?
Well, this is such a funny thing, because the gray wolf is actually already in Colorado. It's just not native to Colorado, in that the wolf is actually moved here from Canada and Wyoming and across. And if the reintroduction is really introducing them, the gray wolf would introduce it into the western slope. So question one, or point one, why was the Front Range, which will never see the gray wolf, get to vote on things that are going to affect the western slope? These ranchers and farmers out there are going to have to deal with this wolf that's being introduced. It's already here, but it's not formally here. And by formally putting it here, it also opens up these poor ranchers to all kinds of federal regulations that I don't think that they've ever thought of. The EPA is going to step in and start working on all of the regulations that it takes in order to have this gray wolf here. Plus, this is going to create a new bureaucracy here in the state of Colorado, because you're going to have all these people monitoring the gray wolf and looking at the gray wolf and how it's going to affect the ranchers. It's just a morass. Let's just leave it the way it is. We don't need to reintroduce them. They're already here. Just let nature take its course. It's the best that we can have happen. It's a big no.
Okay. Let's see. Proposition 115, abortion. Prohibits abortion after 22 weeks gestational age.
This is a touchy one, because people are either pro-life or pro-abortion, but I want to talk to you about the science of this. The generation that's growing up right now actually is the most pro-life generation ever, and there's a reason. They've seen through science their little brother or sister hanging on the refrigerator. They've had a sonogram or from when that child was a peanut, and so they all know it's a baby. We all know it's a baby. what this amendment does is Colorado is one of only 7 states in the union that allows abortion up until birth. This ratchets that back and puts it at 22 weeks because that's when science has determined that a baby can live outside the womb. And that, to me, to err on the side of life is something I can only think would be wise and moral and just beautiful. Because if you err on the other side, we all know you're killing a baby. So 22 weeks is why they determine that date. And there are some exceptions to that. If the life of the mother is in jeopardy, obviously, then that can be a decision after 22 weeks. There is not an exception for rape or incest after 22 weeks because they figure if you've been raped or you've had a horrible thing happen to you, by the 22nd week, you probably have worked through that and made that decision by then. And so there are some penalties to the physician. He does receive a small fine and he does receive a misdemeanor on his record, but he does have his license suspended for 3 years. So we want to make this have enough teeth in it, but we don't want to ruin people because this is a hard decision. But we want everybody to know that this barbaric act of killing a baby after 22 weeks needs to stop. You know, we were always yelling about New York and all these other states that had abortion up to due date, but it's a reality in Colorado as well, and we need to take that into consideration.
So I want to emphasize, like, there is no penalty to the mother or the father. So we want to make that clear. And I want to reiterate that the language, and I did read this because I wanted to know what the language said too, that there are exceptions because of, you know, when you're talking with your doctor and as a mother, if your life is at risk, there are exceptions. And so this is a very personal one for me too, to talk about this. I know it's not a perfect bill by any means, but, you know, when we're talking about the Constitution and the right to life and respecting life and valuing life, I think that this is really important. And, you know, and I would also support legislation of really taking care of these babies. If moms are not in a position or dads are not in a position to take care of these babies, that we are in there with loving arms to help and support and give these moms options, because I've heard statistics like a lot of these moms who have abortions do it because they don't have choices in their lives. You know, they just feel like they don't have a choice. And I know that as a society and as a community, we can do better to help save the lives of the babies, but also save the lives of these moms and dads. I mean, I don't want to discount these dads who want to have these babies, you know, and there's a lot of inequities in this whole conversation. It's not an easy conversation, but I think this is a place where we can start and then continue to show the love and care, a 360 kind of care on this topic. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Proposition 116 is another tax bill, and the description is decreases the state income tax rate from 4.63% to 4.55%. That's it.
I mean, this is one of the simplest ones on the ballot. Colorado is blessed to have a flat income tax. And that means that everybody pays the same rate. So if you're earning $50,000, you pay the same rate. If you are $100,000, you pay the same rate. So when we talk about a decrease in this rate, everyone will receive a tax cut that is paying that rate. You also think about it, if you have a tax increase, it's proportional as well, because the rate is assessed on your income. So if you're earning more money, you will either get a more increase or a larger decrease, but that's because you're earn more, so you pay more. Same thing with down here. If you earn less, you will pay less. Now, this applies to everyone equally, except for those that pay no tax. And there are quite a few people in Colorado that pay no income tax because they're such a low wage earner, they pay none. So when you hear people talk about this, well, it doesn't really equally apply to everybody. Well, I guess if you're earning nothing, you don't get a tax decrease because you can't decrease zero any farther down. So we need to be careful about how we play this because it is a tax decrease for everyone proportionate to the rate. And that's very important. So we need to make sure that we're understanding our language. The other people on the other side have this funny way of saying, well, it's so small. Well, I don't know about you, but I care that it's $100 or if, whatever it's going to be for me. That might be an extra, shoes or a backpack for my kid or a night out with my husband. You know what I'm saying? So don't determine that for me. Let me determine what is appropriate for me because it's my money to begin with. It isn't government's money to keep. So this modest tax reduction shaves off all for the state government that amount of money, very small. I think the fiscal impact is less than $150 million. And out of a $4 billion budget, I think we can afford that. And it sends a message to our state legislators. Look, this money is ours. And during the pandemic, everyone's had to have a decrease. I mean, most people have had some form of decrease in their wage earning. And so why is government exempt from this? We need to have this shared equally. And therefore, we think this is such a modest amount that it's really reasonable. And I think it sends that good message, like we're still in charge here because we're the citizenry, and it empowers our taxpayer Bill of Rights, which allows us then to vote on taxes. And I think that's very important.
Okay. Proposition 117, taxes, requires voter approval of new enterprises that are exempt from Tabor if their revenue is greater than $50 million within its first 5, and then my thing got cut off. First 5 years?
Years. And I think it ends up being like $100 million fiscal impact or when it gets down to the language. But this is a really fantastic amendment. It was, again, citizens rose up and said, hey, wait a minute, we've been paying fees. I think those fees are adding up and it's starting to look like a tax. There's 2 examples. One is the faster fee. Years ago, Colorado had very low fees on our car registration. A couple of years ago, they decided to raise that. And because it's a fee, it was not subject to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights voting as citizens. So that was horrible. Then 2 years ago, they passed the hospital provider fee, which means every single bed that when you stay the night in a hospital is taxed. But they didn't call it a tax, they called it a fee. Well, that fee tax alone has raised over $900 million. That, to me, is unconscionable. That should be a tax, and we should have voted on it. But instead, they relabeled it as a fee. So this would tighten up the language. Again, that's a great thing because they've been able to get around all this by classifying things as fees instead of a tax. And it says, look, if you're going to have a fee, whatever that definition is, that has a fiscal impact of $100 million or more, then we need to vote on it. I mean, it's simple. Because I'm getting a tax or a fee, then I need to vote on it. Now, this does not mean things like, the state parks fee or something like that. We're talking very large, $100 million or more fiscal impact. So it's not going to make our ballot any longer. It's just going to allow us as citizens to hold our legislators a lot more accountable, and they're going to have to ask consent. We need to vote on taxes.
Is it 100 million or 50 million?
I think it's 100 million.
Okay, I might want to double check this because I printed this off the ballot website and it says.
Okay, I've got my ballot language here as
great.
well.
Yeah, let's
and since yours, let's see. Um, dun, dun, dun. Um, my phone is ringing. Sorry about that.
Chandler's tonight.
I know. There you go. You know, I don't have it written in here. I know it is, though. I think it's $100 million. But regardless, 50 million, 100 million, and when it raises that kind of money, I think they should ask us to vote on something like that, because the hospital provider fee in of itself raised $900 million. And right now there is no mechanism to vote on fees. So all we have to do is recategorize something, and now we don't get to vote on it at all. So this at least allows us as citizens to say, you know, that fee is too large. We need to vote on it. So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. You're correct. I just looked at what I see from the website. This website says 50 million, but I'm looking on the website here and it says 100 million. I just wanted to make sure when voters go to read it that they're not getting confusing information. So
sure.
We got that.
Because I was like, well, maybe I'm wrong, but I know it's, you know, I figure if something's going to raise that kind of money, you know, maybe you should ask me.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is really sneaky to call something a fee, and it keeps going up and up and up, and then yeah. So I think that was great to make us aware of that. So the final proposition is 118, which has to do with healthcare, and it establishes a program for mandatory paid medical and family leave.
This one is a big no for multiple reasons. And I know that most people are like, but I want paid family leave. Well, here's my solution for that. Negotiate it with your employer. You as an employee have every right to one-on-one negotiate between you and your employer when you're hired or later on your terms of employment. So why should government be telling your employer what to do and telling you as the employee what to do? So that would be my first say. Look, government doesn't need to mandate anything here. I have the ability to negotiate directly with my employer. The other component of this is it's a payroll tax. It really is. Although they're calling it a fee, so I just want you to know that, but it's only for those that are earning a wage. So that means if you are earning a paycheck, being paid hourly or by salary through a payroll, you will have this apply to you whether you use it or not. So if you make a lot of money outside of your wage, let's say you're an investor, you own property, you own apartment complexes or whatever, this will never apply to you because it's only run through payroll. Plus, it only applies to businesses that have 9 or more employees. So if you have that 9th employee, that employee is going to cost that business a lot of money because this tax burden is bared at 50% from the employer and 50% of the employee. Again, whether you use it or not, whether the employer uses it or not for their employees, this tax applies if you're a wage earner. So think about all of the waitresses, those that own, let's say a pizza company, a pizzeria, and you've got like 4 people back there making pizzas and you've got a waitress and you've got this, pretty soon you're at that 9 employees and you're going to be subject to this tax whether your employees are of that age to use it or not. So this is very, very onerous. And also I want you to know most of the money that's coming to propose this is coming from out of state, because a lot of places want to see how big they could get paid family leave in Colorado. This is a very, very generous program. There are other states that have mandatory paid family leave, but none of them are as generous as this is in Colorado. And because it's a fee, it's housed by a board that oversees how it's being run. That amount of money is always going to go for what they say the Cadillac program is going to be, and they're never going to scale it back. They expect it to be insolvent within the first 3 years because of the amount of people that will be using it as opposed to the amount of people that are paying the tax. And so they're going to have to adjust that by raising that fee that they're going to charge you, which is a tax. So here's a side note. Even if this Amendment 118 was passed and Amendment 117 on fees was passed at the same time, 118 would still be in effect because 118 and 117 are being proposed at the same time. And so we need to vote this down, and we need to vote it down hard, because it will, at least if this again comes up in the future, if 117 passes, we can vote on it as an incremental thing, not as a blanket dollar check. Because once they set this program in motion, it will have to be funded, and it'll be funded by a fee, not a tax, even though it's coming out of your payroll. Even though it's coming out of your payroll.
So, I mean, like in theory, I mean, so many people would love to have this type of benefit. But what I'm hearing you say is the realities of how it would be implemented does not look as rosy as just a, you know, we're going to have this medical benefit. So if I can say it back, I can understand it. So how this bill is worded is that if you own a business and you have under 9 employees, you are not subject to paying this fee of where the employer pays 50% and the employee pays 50%. So if you work in rural Colorado in a mom and pop place, and you're a young gal and you get married and you get pregnant and there's fewer than 9 employees, you don't get paid medical leave. I think that's really important to know for people to understand.
Exactly. You're still not going to get the benefit of it, even though it's a statewide proposition. But you can negotiate with your employer directly. So whether you're working for 5 people or 50 people, you have the power to negotiate that already. Do we need government to say you can't or you can? Do we really need government in that role? No, we don't, because I may or may not need it. And another point is, let's say I work for a big employer and we have this great Family Medical Leave Act, but I recognize that I really don't want 3 months off. I really only want a month or 2. And I would rather have that money that you're paying for the family medical leave as a bonus, right? Because I can't eat time. I can eat money. I can pay my rent with money. So I'd rather have that extra month's worth of pay instead of the time off as a raise.
Like double dip? Is that what you're saying? Like double?
Or just the fact that, what if I can negotiate a higher pay at the beginning of my, employment, because I'm only going to use 1 month or 2 months instead of the maximum of 3 months. I would rather have a larger paycheck, because I can't pay my rent with time. So you're going to give me 3 months off, but really, can I eat? I can't really pay anything with that time off. This is paid family leave, but it's not paid at the same rate at which you're working.
Okay, that's my question. Okay, so clarify that. So if you take this pay, hypothetically, if you take this paid family leave, how much of your paycheck are you getting? Are you getting 100% of your paycheck, or what are you getting?
You're getting the benefits that are mandated by this commission, which I don't think have been outlined.
Oh, so we don't even know what the paid family leave looks like. So
all we know is that they've said that it's going to be a Cadillac plan. They haven't really given all the specifics. That's why this commission is being created. And so, but they do know that it's going to be paid 50% and 50%, and this employer, and you'd have to have 9, but they really haven't outlined the benefits yet. And I think that's where it gets a little murky too, because again, what if I don't want the benefit that you're offering me? What if I want different? What if I want it to be lower so I can have more pay? What if I don't want to use it at all? I still have to pay it. So it's just really deceptive, because everybody thinks paid family leave is a good thing, and it is. So let me and my employer negotiate it directly. Do not let government negotiate that for me, because they don't have my best interest at heart. And so the employer and the employee does. If I'm worth it, the employer will give it to me. If I'm not, then that's okay. But don't make government force, any party to do something that they're not willing to do on their own.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like a tax to me, especially if you're paying this and you are never going to have children, or you never have children, or you're past childbearing age, or but everybody's paying in but won't receive the benefit of that. It's there are a lot of question marks to this, and I hope that people take a look at it and ask the tough questions, because yeah, what if you pass it and it doesn't give you the types of benefits you think you're entitled to? That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money going into overseeing. What you got there for me? It looks like you got something.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things here, it says it could provide up to 16 weeks of paid leave for certain qualifying conditions and would be financed by taxes on all employees in the state. And so, what condition qualifies? I mean, this commission is going to be set up to determine all of that. But if we put it in place and we don't get to vote on that, then what are we voting for? I would rather have the private negotiation between me and my employer, because what if I never use it? What if I, need it right away? What if those are all the things, and that can be negotiated between me and my employer privately. And not with
there was language in that said you have to actually have been working for your employer for a certain amount of time before you even qualify for that.
And again, the commission will set this all up. And really, I don't like the fact that government often, when they have hard decisions, they push it down to these commissions, which generally have unelected, citizenry sitting on these boards. And you get these boards that are full of people that don't necessarily have your best interest at heart. And so, again, I would really rather negotiate directly with my employer. And I think that's the best solution for everyone. As an employee, I would appreciate that. As an employer, because what if you're a small business and you don't have the capacity to pay for this, and you want to hire that 10th employee because you want to grow your business? All of a sudden, you will not do that. And that has limited you as an employer, and it's limited you as an employee, because all of a sudden the business that you've been working for is never going to grow. So there might not be an opportunity for you to go up a ladder of success, even in that own business. You might have to leave that employee or employer to go to another business because you're never going to get a better opportunity. And so this is full of all kinds of things. Of all of the ballot measures that are on it, this is the most fiscally troublesome and adds the most layer of government that I think would be destructive to families, even though they say it's paid family leave.
Interesting. Wow, I wasn't sure we were going to be able to get through all of these ballot measures, and you were just like boom, boom, boom. Like, I want to emphasize here at the tail end, just like I did at the beginning, that it's really important that people take the time. I know it takes a lot of time. Like, you're looking at candidates from president all the way down to like, who are these judges? There are races that people don't know what they do. They've never heard of them. You go to a website and sometimes it doesn't even give you, if you don't know this person, it's really tough when you're looking at mailers and political, because everything right now is a political attack, and the information that voters get are a lot of times misleading or doesn't give you the complete story, and people just don't have the time. But I'm going to urge everybody to start looking at these ballot measures, digging deeper, asking questions, vote your values, make up your mind. We have our own opinions, of course, everybody has their own opinions, but at least, like you said, when you do your homework, you own your vote, own your vote and vote all the way down the ballot, have a voice. I'm going to let you give us your final thoughts here, Kathleen.
Well, I just would, again, like to emphasize that if you see a ballot measure that has a letter in it it is from your state legislature. They either couldn't do something or wanted to refer it back to the citizens to vote. And just my opinion is whenever government's asking you for something, it means that they're going to grab your wallet. So just think about that when you see a letter. And that even goes down to your state or to your local municipalities, your school board races and all of those. Think about how that impacts you, not only in your community, because we all want an educated citizenry. There is no disputing that. But how are they being educated? Why? Why this? Why that? And how is the money being spent? Is it being spent wisely? Because I know that I have to spend my money wisely. So that's one thing to think about. The other is when you deal with stuff that's in the Blue Book, the language in the Blue Book is very challenging because the state legislatures have the ability to write that language. We as citizens don't have that much input. So oftentimes the language itself in the Blue Book is biased. There is one good thing in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. If anything has to do with tax issues, it's always in capital letters. So if you've ever wondered why your Blue Book has all this like loud shouting type language, it's because they want to get your attention. Look, this is going to impact you fiscally. You are going to end up paying more money. Even though the ballot language might say without raising taxes, it really is a raising of taxes because they're changing a rate or they're changing this or they're changing. There's a huge amount of implications. So really think about how you're reading these ballot languages to understand them more, because the idea here is education and thinking. We as a people have gotten away from thinking, and I want you to be empowered. Part of the liberty movement, part of being free people, is also being free to think, not to always just lockstep this or that party or this or that issue, but to go, is this the best for me and my family? And is it the best for my community? Because if we don't do that, then we're just no better than, lemmings that just vote away, or those that don't vote at all. By the way, judges, I want to just give a quick thing over judges. All judges that are up for retention, if you do not vote on a judge, you are an automatic yes vote because you're voting to retain or not to retain. So if you're not voting at all, they automatically get their job back. And judges are no different than you and me. If they're not doing a good job, they should be voted out. Well, the Blue Book often has these commissions that set out to retain all judges. So I would ask, I know it's really hard, but there's a couple of judges that really do need to be thrown out. Just my personal opinion, I vote no on every judge every time because I figure they're a judge. They could get a job doing something else, and why not have a new set of blood every couple of years into our judicial system? So those are some things to think about. And I think it's really important that we as citizens take back our country by taking back our community and stop complaining.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Kathleen, and for these thorough explanations. And I think you have encouraged a lot of people just to dig a little bit deeper, think a little bit harder, and understand a little bit more on what we're looking at on the ballot. So I hope you have a wonderful evening. Please tell your amazing husband, Roger, I said hello.
I will.
Be well, stay safe, and stay healthy, okay?
You too, Priscilla. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.